Hi everyone, it's Miss Leslie, back with another class of sculptured painting. Today we will be making these two lovely little votive candle holders. Find the votive candle holders inside of this cardboard tube, which should have one end that takes out. And you want to just reach inside and carefully pull out what should be two wrapped glass votive candle holders. Okay, so we will need these two things for supplies today. You'll need Mod Podge, a smooth brush, not the rough brush that we usually use. You'll need a palette for putting your Mod Podge in, and you'll need a selection of colored tissue paper. Now for this project, the examples I brought come in some pretty basic color groupings. So this one I did pink and orange and yellow and just overlapped the different colors. These two, I went with a color gradient or an ombre feel of dark blue on the bottom or dark green on the bottom, getting up to the lighter colors toward the top of the votive. Okay, so you can choose whatever colors you want to use. You can do any pattern you like. You can overlap different colors to make it look exactly how you want it to look, because these are for you and you do with them what you like. Now I've chosen to do a rainbow pattern on mine, so I've already separated out my rainbow of colors in tissue paper: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, something that looks like purple. Okay, and we're going to need to either cut these or rip them into smaller pieces. Now I like the look of the ripped edges, like you'll see on these. These pieces of tissue paper were torn as opposed to cut. But if you'd like to cut little squares or rectangles out for you to use, you can do that. I'm going to go ahead and just stack my tissue paper all together, and then I'm just going to tear it all as one big group, because I'm going to use all of these colors. Just going to tear it into little pieces, just like we did when we were using the white tissue paper for the other projects. Now, because these glass votives are rather small compared to the canvases we've worked on before, we want to use smaller pieces of tissue paper. We are going to be layering it and building up on top of each other with the different colors. So just give yourself a nice little pile of the colors you want to use, and then we're about ready to get started. So I'm going to take a little bit of the Mod Podge, which still has its lid on underneath. Take out that little white thingy there. Screw that back on. Oh, before we begin, actually, for this project, you're going to need to protect your surface. So you can use a piece of wax paper, okay, which your parents might have in the kitchen, piece of wax paper, or a piece of aluminum foil. This is so you can set down your project while it's still wet and not worry about it getting glued directly to the table. So once you have your surface covered, I'm using wax paper because I found the aluminum foil was a little too shiny for the camera and it did not like it. So I'm setting my tissue paper over here, got my brush. You'll also want to keep a cup of water handy for rinsing your brush out. Some of the colors of tissue paper will bleed and smear and turn your brush and the Mod Podge a different color. So to hold these, I like to just put my hand right inside. And I'm going to start, because that's the easiest way for me to hold it, I'm going to start by working on the bottom and then work my way up. So I'm doing a rainbow, which means I want my bottom color to be purple, because eventually it's going to go red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. So I'm going to start with purple and then work backwards. Okay, I have some purple pieces separated out. Now I'm going to squeeze a little Mod Podge into my palette. We're only going to end up using a very small amount of Mod Podge for this project. It doesn't take much. So I'm going to get a little bit on my brush, and I'm going to paint a small area here because I don't want it to dry out. And then I'm going to take my purple pieces and brush them down. So just like everything else we do in sculptured painting, you want glue underneath and glue on top of each piece that you put on your project. And you'll notice if you have a little bit of glue or Mod Podge on your brush, you can just use that brush to pick up little pieces of tissue paper and put them down, and that'll help keep your hands a little cleaner because this stuff is very sticky. Very sticky. And you'll notice I'm leaving the bottom open for now, but I think I'm gonna go ahead and put some tissue paper on that just so that it's fully covered on the bottom. So I'm gonna do this whole bottom area in purple. Now that I have all of my purple on here, I just want to smooth down any wrinkles or bubbles that I have because ultimately I want this to be smooth on the outside. And that's why we're using a smooth brush. And you can also see how the brush has blue. It looks like blue paint on it now, and that's just the Mod Podge taking some of the color out of the tissue paper. So before I start my next color, I'm going to go ahead, rinse out my brush very thoroughly. And I'm going to dry it off also because tissue paper is very thin, and if we get it too wet, it will fall apart. So we've done purple, and now I'm going to move on to blue, and I'm going to overlap some of the colors. So I'm going to have a little bit of blue on top of the purple there. And I'm just going to do little pieces at a time here, because if I want to fit 6 colors in, my rows of color will have to be pretty small. I keep forgetting to put Mod Podge down first. So another little layer there. A little bit on top. And just work our way around the cup. Now with the yellow is a very clear color. So if you're using a light color like yellow or some of the pinks, and you want the color to look really dark when it's finished, you might want to do 2 layers of yellow on top of each other to get a more vibrant color. So I'm going to overlap this yellow quite a bit more than I did the blues and the greens. Also, because the green is still wet, my brush is picking up a lot of the green pigment and smearing it onto the yellow. So I'm going to try to avoid overlapping too much so that I don't have to keep rinsing my brush out every 30 seconds. To be clear, I'm avoiding overlapping the green. I am just overlapping the yellow on top of itself. I didn't initially rip up enough pieces of any of the colors that I started with, so I've had to stop and rip up more as I go, which is fine. But if you're doing that, just be aware that your fingers might be a little stickier than when you started. You might have little pieces or spots of Mod Podge on your surface area that you're working on, which could just make it kind of a sticky pain in the butt. So my recommendation is do all of your tissue paper tearing before you start, and then keep your tissue paper away from the stickiest spots in your work area. Okay, we're all done with yellow. Now we're going to move on to orange and then red. Now for my final layer of red, I'm going to go right up to the edge of the glass. I don't want it to overlap. The main reason for that is because I don't want my hands to get sticky right now. But eventually, if you put a candle in here, we are using tissue paper, which is technically flammable. Now, once the Mod Podge is on, it shouldn't be flammable at all. But I like to keep all of the decorative stuff on the outside of the jar. So I'm just going to find pieces of tissue paper that I've ripped that have a straight edge or close to a straight edge, and use those right up against the top of the candle holder. So for this last layer, I'm kind of going to be working from the top, this being the top, down towards the rainbow. Now, as I've been doing this, I have covered up all the gaps so that there are no holes, as far as I know, is where there's no tissue paper coloring it. But if you wanted to, if you find little holes in there and you like the way they look, just keep them there, because that's more light to shine. That's more area where light can shine through if you're burning a candle or put a little electric or battery powered light in here. It's also okay if your tissue paper wrinkles up while you're doing this. Some of mine is wrinkly and some of it is pretty smooth, but when this is all dry, when all is said and done, it's all going to be pretty smooth. It's definitely not as bumpy as any of our other sculptured paintings where we used tape. And you can see that Mod Podge is turning red here too. And that's okay, because we're on that red layer. Right up against the edge. Just remember to smooth everything out so that there's no bubbles. And by bubbles, I mean you don't want any air trapped under your tissue paper, because then when it dries, it will be lumpy, but also it won't be as sturdy as the rest of it. So one nice thing about taking something like this glass, which is pretty fragile, and then covering it in tissue paper and glue, is it actually makes it much, much stronger and harder to break. Now that is not a challenge, okay? So I don't want to hear anyone say challenge accepted. But trust me when I say, if you take good care of them, these candle holders can last a long time And like a lot of the other things we do in this class, might make a nice gift for someone if you wanted to give gifts for a holiday or a birthday or any occasion. We are almost done here. Just a few more pieces. Ah, sticky. I'm just going to cover up a couple of these gaps in my red. And okay. Now I'm going to look all around my candle holder, make sure I don't see any little pieces of tissue paper sticking up. We don't want this really to be too three-dimensional. I want to make sure everything is covered in color and in Mod Podge. And it looks pretty complete. And we're going to leave it upside down while it dries. So just very carefully remove it from your hand and face it. Leave it to dry upside down. Now Mod Podge, a small amount like this could be dry in a couple of hours, but to be safe, I would wait at least overnight before flipping it over and using it to put anything in, like a candle or any other little thing you might want to collect. Like say a pile of loose scraps of tissue paper. Fit very nicely in there. So that is our votive candle holder sculptured painting class. I only did one to show you the technique, but you can do both of yours as one set, meaning you can make them both the same color and pattern, or you can do them both differently. So if you like the look of doing a rainbow, but you also like the monochrome look, you can do that. I personally like the way these two green and blue ones go together. When we first did this summer, I did that because I like these two colors. So I actually burn these in my house. I put little candles in there and I use these two together because I like those colors. So that's it for sculptured painting. Have a great week, everybody.